So I want to begin by showing you something interesting. If we come over to our color set libraries, you'll see that I currently have the Pantone process coded chipset loaded. So if I come over into my text tool, you'll find that we have an icon here that's not currently in our text palette, and that is for selecting a color. And if we click on this, it'll take a second to load all those chips. You'll see that we have the exact same color choices that we have. So if I change this to something like that cyan, you'll see that the color changes. Now, of course, I could also change it very easily by simply clicking on the main color and just picking a color like so and saying OK. Now, that will only work when we're in the text tool. If we try to do that with the layer adjuster, that won't work. Now, in addition to that, we'll come back here, we have the ability of setting up a drop shadow. Now, below at the bottom here, you'll see that we have two icons. Right here, we have text attributes, and next to that, we have shadow attributes. Now, whichever one of these is highlighted is going to have an impact as to what's being affected. So if we want to affect the main text that we're working with here, which is the only thing we have currently because we're only using the basic no shadow text, then we can change the composite method, we can change the opacity of that text. And notice, by the way, that we do not have the ability to change the composite method or the opacity of the layer in the layers palette. We have to do it down here in the text palette. And then we can also change and create a blur effect to that text. And we can even do a motion blur effect. So we could pick a particular angle that we want to have that motion blur effect, and then we could do a really interesting wild effect on that text. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And actually go ahead and reduce that back to 0, and then reduce that back to 0. Now if we turn on the shadow, the external shadow, you'll see a typical drop shadow type of effect. Now this might be a little bit on the harsh side. So here's a good place where we might want to just blur that a little bit, and then maybe even reduce the opacity a little bit. Now, if we want to move that drop shadow, we can, as long as we're in the layer adjuster tool. We can simply click on the shadow itself and then move it to wherever we'd like it to be. So maybe I like something like so. In addition to our typical drop shadow, we also have the ability to work with an internal shadow. And this basically works as if we were cutting holes into that white paper, and we're revealing a purple paper that was behind it that's catching the shadows from the light of the edges of this. And we'll just go ahead and zoom way in here real quickly so that you can see this. So right now it's a little bit blurry and it's a little bit dull. So let's just go ahead and increase the opacity and reduce the blur so that you can really see this. Now again, if you use the layer adjuster tool, you can simply click on that and move it around until you get to the place where you're happy with that effect. So if you want the light to be coming from this direction, you set it there. From underneath, you'd set it there. From above, you'd set it something like so. And of course, like I say, you can even set up a motion blur, a directional blur in here as well, although it doesn't make an awful lot of sense for this type of effect. So let me just go ahead and turn that off and reduce the blur back to a place where maybe it's a little bit more subtle. So those are some more advanced functionalities that you can do here with the text in Coreal Painter. And of course, as you can see, everything's still live, which means that I could, if I wanted to, simply come in here and change something like that. And everything updates, all those filter effects update. And I can, as a matter of fact, even change my text attribute and create a blur for that, as well as a blur for the inner shadow effect right here, or the outer shadow effect if I wanted to. And in this way, I could end up with some interesting embossing type functionality. If I wanted to go ahead and just set that for a really low blur, something like 1.5, and set this for an equally low blur, something like that, and then set up a layer mask on this to mask that out, I could easily set up some sort of effect where things were being embossed, and that might be interesting as well.